We are less than 2 weeks away from the 2023-2024 college football playoffs. Two very exciting games, two matchups who are very different from each other, but each unique in their own right. I'm joined by special guest Kelley Ford, known as for his Twitter account. He is with thelines.com. A fun follow on Twitter. You can find him at KFordRatings. He is known for his power rankings, his watchability ratings, and of course his famous what if rankings. Those are personally my favorite. I look forward to those every week, both college and NFL football. So let's get into it, man. Alabama versus Michigan, the 1 versus 4. Michigan 13-0. Great season from them. And what's even more impressive is that they did it without their head coach for half of the way. Truly can't say enough about that team and what they were able to do. Now, did they really beat a lot of adversity? Not really, considering the circumstances, but they made it 13-0 all the way through the Big Ten. Alabama, there's no team that's been more improved than that team, in my opinion. Nick Saban has crushed it. Truly been one of the kind of most polarizing turnarounds that I've seen within a season in recent memory. So lots of different storylines, lots of different angles. But to me, the biggest matchup in this one, Jalen Milroe versus Michigan defense. Jalen Milroe, he really came onto the scene later in the season, beat a lot of very good teams, and he really did it with his arm, truthfully. He's really known for running with his legs, but what's been impressive to me is he has one of the prettiest deep balls in college football, ending the season like that, the way he did. So before I get into any of the numbers and what I got, Kelley, what do you think about this game? Michigan's a 1.5 point favorite. It started off at 2.5, closed down to 1.5. Wouldn't be surprised if it closed down even more. Alabama, there's 75% of the tickets, according to Action Network, that is on Alabama, and 84% of the handle coming in on Alabama. So what's your gut feeling about this? What do you think?
Yeah, Harry. Well, first, I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun talking college football, and of course, the playoff is the culmination of the regular season and all the games that we love watching every single Saturday. So, for this game in particular, you mentioned for you, it comes down to Jalen Milroe against that Michigan defense. And so, if I kind of go off of that, I think that's a fair assessment because this Michigan defense, for me, is the number one defense in the entire country. They have been the number one defense in the entire country since week 10. They started the year number 3. They didn't get any worse than that, right? So this is a defense that we knew was going to be good. They have played up to that standard, even exceeded that standard. And Michigan's a team as a whole, they've improved their power rating, not just on the defensive side of the ball, Harry, but on the offense plus defense, their whole K-Ford power rating. It has improved more than 5 points from preseason to current. That puts them in the top 25 on my list of kind of rating movement teams, 1 to 133. They're in the top 25 of that. So both sides playing really well. The defense in particular, as you mentioned, if we look at the other kind of top defenses that Alabama has played this year, just by my current unit ranks right now, you've got Georgia, I have as the number 6 defensive unit in the country. Texas, all the way back in week 2, of course, a game that carried a lot of weight for the committee, the number 10 defense in the country. Outside of that, Texas A&M's number 14, Auburn's number 19, right? So even though Alabama played an incredibly difficult schedule, they weren't necessarily playing top-end defenses week in and week out. Now, of course, they don't get to play their own defense in a game. They see them in practice every day, which is probably more important for Jalen Milroe. But Alabama's defense, for me, number 7 in their own right. So I do think that's a big matchup question mark in this game is Jalen Milroe, that number 12 Alabama offense against the number 1 Michigan defense. Because, Harry, on the other side, that's number 7 Alabama defense, as I just said, against the number 7 Michigan offense. So not sure how much is in it on that side. The question will be, can Jalen Milroe and that Alabama offense do enough? I've just given you all my unit numbers. Michigan is my number 1 power-rated team overall. I actually have them as the favorite in this game by more than Vegas. My numbers make this Michigan minus 4.5. So I know it opened 2.5, like you said, bet down to 1.5. I actually think it got lower than that. Maybe it's come back up a little bit if I'm not mistaken on that. So my model says there is value in Michigan, especially at 1.5, crossing that important number of 3 there. But that being said, like, Kelley, what does your gut say? I would not be surprised at all if Alabama wins this game. Nick Saban with 3-4 weeks to prepare. Man, he's hard enough to beat, like, just in general. Give him that much time to prepare and scheme it up. I also am not sure how favorable the matchups are. Like the individual stylistic matchups here are for Michigan. I actually think Alabama probably has the edge in those matchups, kind of across the board, or at least in the important positions. For Alabama, Harry, you said they've improved greatly over the course of the year, and I will say, of course, their play has improved since losing to Texas in week 2, since beating USF on the road by only 2 touchdowns in week 3. From a power rating standpoint, Alabama came into the year number 3 for me. They had a power rating of 26.1 after the Middle Tennessee game, where they looked really, really good. I mean, they won by 49 points or whatever it was. They looked really good in that game. They actually improved to the number 1 power rated team in the country for me. Then the Texas game happened. Then the USF game happened. They fell all the way to number 10 in the power ratings going into the Tennessee game in week 8. They have since steadily improved since then. They come into this game power rated number 6 for me overall. I already gave the unit ranks number 7 on defense, 12 on offense. So from a power rating standpoint, this team is actually power rated worse now than they were at the beginning of the year, but they are power rated better now than they were at their lowest point, of course, halfway through the season. So my gut tells me Alabama's going to find a way. The power ratings say Michigan is the most complete team. Michigan's floor, Harry, the way that I've kind of talked about Michigan this year, their floor is just higher than any other team's floor. Like they really don't play bad games. There was a 7-point win at Maryland, if you're going to call that maybe a game where you expected more from them. But there's really not a game this year where you look at it and you say, yeah, they just didn't show up. It took a little bit longer than the model expected in the early part of the season for them to pull away from some teams that aren't very good opponents. But by the end of the game, it was very clear, like, yeah, this Michigan team, they're in control. They've got it. So their floor, I think, is probably the highest in the country. Alabama's ceiling, I think, is higher than Michigan's ceiling. So if both of these teams play an A-plus game, I think Alabama wins it. The problem is Michigan on average, the problem for Alabama, I should say, is Michigan on average has played closer to that A-plus game on a consistent basis than Alabama has. Certainly Alabama's coming off a really good performance against Georgia, but just the week before that at Auburn, and I know it's the Iron Bowl. It's a huge rivalry. They're on the road. Like, all those factors need to be considered. Yep. But let's not forget, it took 4th and goal from the 31 for them to win that game. So it's not like it's not like Alabama's been a juggernaut all year. They've really found their stride here in the SEC Championship game, and with a month to prepare, my gut tells me, just because I've seen it so many times before, my gut tells me Nick Saban will have them ready, and it'll be a good game. I will say before we transition to the other game, Harry, the winner of this game, both by my numbers and in my gut, will be a favorite in the national championship game against whoever wins the other semifinal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a couple of things to touch on there. And what it's super interesting that Alabama started up high in your power rankings because, the narrative coming into the season was this is not going to be the same Alabama teams that we've seen. And so that keys to me because, I do a show with Brendan. He was big on Alabama the entire season because 3 of the top 6 rated recruiting classes of all time are on campus at Alabama right now. The only thing that they didn't have was that 5-star quarterback. And lo and behold, look at what Jalen Monroe's turned into. So that's very interesting to me. And I'm, that kind of proves a little bit in your power ratings because you can't ignore that. You can't ignore the talent that Alabama has on that roster. And that kind of leads me to a question that I have. It's one thing I have written down is there a quarterback that Michigan has faced that is like Jalen Monroe? And, you think about some of the bigger games on their schedule. They had Kyle McCord against Ohio State. They had Drew Aller at Penn State, who was really kind of a disappointment, at times throughout the year. He didn't really flash his arm talent as much as I'd really hope so. But again, true freshman, we'll see next year or the following year. But I can't think, maybe Indiana, but they had Taven Jackson who came in. He did really well, but still, there's nobody that really matches the profile of Jalen Monroe. Is anybody come to the top of your mind?
I would agree with you that there's really not a direct comp. As I'm looking at their schedule here, it might be the game I mentioned earlier, the only game you say, hey, we probably expect you to win by more. Talia Tagovailoa, maybe, like at Maryland. Is he maybe a somewhat comparable comp to Jalen Monroe? I mean, I think you're stretching there, but he's probably the closest for me with regard to what Michigan has played. So I think that's fair. I mean, this is if we look at, I did the breakdown of Alabama, and this is the best defense that they've played all year, and it will continue to be. This is the best offense that Michigan's defense will face all year. I can give you the breakdown quickly of what Michigan's defense has faced in terms of opposing offenses so far. Alabama at number 12, that's the best offense that this defense has faced. If outside of that, if you're looking at the unit ranks here, it's not great. Ohio State's offense, which coming into the year I thought was going to be a top 2 or 3 offense, just didn't quite get it done at the quarterback position. And of course, McCord has transferred now to Syracuse since the end of the year. Number 17 is that Ohio State offense for me in terms of unit rankings. That's the best offense they faced to this point. And so outside of that, I mean, I'm going to, as I look quickly, number 24, Penn State. Again, I had high hopes for Drew Aller and that offense as well. You touched on maybe not quite living up to it this year. Let's see moving forward what he's able to do in 2024. Outside of that, the next best offense, I mean, those are the 2 top 25s. Outside of that, Maryland's at 43. UNLV, believe it or not, is that number 45.
That's wild.
Yeah, you're coming off a game where you just faced the number 125 Iowa offense. We could do a whole segment on that on a different show. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's something that we definitely need to be watching for on that side of the ball. This is the best opposing offense that Michigan's defense has faced, and it's the best opposing defense that Alabama's offense has faced. So, and you'd expect that. This is a college football playoff, right? Like, this is the pinnacle. This is that culmination. So I think all of that comes into this. I will also say, back to the point about Alabama and their power rating, 2 things here. In the preseason, I wrote an article for thelines.com. They asked me to take a look. Okay, look at the current odds being offered by sportbooks to win the national championship. Kelley, run that through, put those up against what your model's saying, how the season's kind of going to be simulated and who you expect to be there at the end. There were only two teams in terms of what the odds being offered were. That it was actually, it would be a good bet based on what my numbers are saying their chances are to make the CFP and to win the national championship versus what Vegas is offering those odds at. And of course, it makes sense. Vegas is gonna put out offers that or lines that favor them. There were 2 value bets, if you will, and they weren't huge values, but it was plus expected value. One of them was Ohio State. They come within 1 possession on the road at Michigan from being in the CFP, most likely. That one's out the window, though. The other one was Alabama, which was kind of hard to believe because people were saying what you were saying, like, I don't know if this is the team. And by my own power ratings right now, Harry, this is the worst Alabama team since 2013. It's the worst crazy Alabama team in a decade. Yet here I am saying, yeah, I think they probably win the national championship because that's just what they do. So, yes, this is a down year for Alabama. I said consistently over the course of this year on the Lions podcast, on We Hate Your Team, on any podcast I was on, any radio I was talking on, people had asked about Alabama. And my answer was always, this is not even close to the best Alabama team that Nick Saban's had in Tuscaloosa. In fact, it's one of the worst, if not the worst, they've had in a decade or 15 years. However, Alabama doesn't have to be better than the previous versions of itself. Alabama only has to be better than the opponents on its schedule in 2023, which is exactly what they have been, with the exception, of course, of that week 2 game at home against Texas. And so, all of that needs to be considered here. Well, I'm talking about the best or worst team since when. By my power ratings, Harry, this is something that I had to double check multiple times coming into bowl season here. Michigan, this is the highest I have had Michigan power rated in my data set, which goes back to the beginning of college football. Again, it's estimated ratings the farther back in time you go. But I have at least an estimated power rating for every single team that's ever played at the highest level of college football. This is the best Michigan has ever been power rated. And this is a storied program, a blue blood, multiple national championships. The last time Michigan finished number 1 in my power ratings was 1964. So it's been a very, very long time since Michigan has been number 1 in my power ratings, and it's never happened that they've had a power rating what they do right now, which is 28.0. That means that on a neutral field, my numbers suggest Michigan is 28 points, 4 touchdowns better than the average FBS team. So that's kind of the scaling of the power ratings there. That's at a high level what the historical numbers are saying about these 2 versions of these programs here in 2023.
Right. And with this Michigan team, what really blows my mind is they are so good. There's a lot of people that over the past few games that they've played that they've knocked JJ McCarthy for only throwing the ball 8 times. But you take a step back and look at it from the big picture. If you're winning games and you're only throwing the ball 8 times, you're doing something right. Truth be told. And so if you don't have to throw the ball, if you don't have to put the ball in the air, why not? You know, you have 2 elite rushers. You have one of the best graded offensive line. I have Michigan PFF graded at the number 9th team overall in run blocking. So why do that? And we will probably have to see JJ McCarthy do more than he has. Actually, it's inevitable in a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very curious to see what he's capable of. We've seen him flash some big plays, especially last year. I feel like last year we really saw more of JJ McCarthy and what he is able to do, albeit in a game where they lost against TCU, but he's going to have to do more. And so that's one thing that concerns me. And another thing that concerns me is Alabama. One of the most improved part of their teams is, one, their offensive line. They were one of the worst teams in terms of sacks allowed to begin the season. And 2, their secondary wasn't its typical, bulletproof secondary. We saw teams like Tennessee air it out in the first half of that game and run up a lot of points. We've seen, we saw Texas and what Texas did in their own house at the beginning of the season. But again, not that's the Alabama team of earlier in the season. We're talking about the Alabama team of now. And if you watch the Georgia game, 2 things popped out. One, their DBs were everywhere. There was never a time where Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey was wide open. Never. And so that's one thing that sticks out to me. And we know Nick Saban, he's known for coaching up the DBs. So naturally, look at where they are. Most improved unit on the defensive side of the ball for sure. And then their offensive line. I've never seen a team go head to head with Georgia and beat them in the trenches like Alabama did. You can probably pull out a lot of explosive plays, beat Georgia, whatever. But for a team like Alabama to go in there and bully Georgia's trenches, that's impressive in its own right. And I think that's what Michigan has to worry about. I think the improvement in both the secondary and the offensive and defensive line for Alabama is really what concerns me. And of course, JJ McCarthy having to do what he has to do. Naturally, he hasn't done it the entire season. But another question for you, Jim Harbaugh being back, you mentioned something. Nick Saban, you give him a month to prepare. He's one of the best to ever do it, the best to ever do it. But Jim Harbaugh being back with the team for a full month, what kind of significance do you think that brings to this Michigan team?
Yeah, I think it's very significant, and I think you saw what the absence of Jim Harbaugh meant from a rallying standpoint, that the Michigan players and coaching staff were able to kind of galvanize themselves around, hey, our coach, our leader is, in their eyes, being unjustly, unfairly punished. It gave Michigan a reason to have a chip on their shoulder. It gave them a reason to be ticked off. And that they use that, and they use that in the game against Maryland. Of course, they use that in the game, at Penn State, then Maryland, and then the Ohio State game. Now, he was back, of course, for the Iowa game in the Big Ten Championship. So it's not like you're going to get this bump from him returning in the playoff, because they have had him back now for a game. But yeah, anytime you're playing with your head coach, I expect the team to be better than when they're not with their head coach, right? I mean, and that makes sense, but there is that motivational aspect that, of course, they use very well. So I think, honestly, the more interesting storyline here for me, Harry, as we talk about it, is, so Michigan's 13-0. Harbaugh was not there for 6 of those wins. And so, to me, it's more of almost a administrative question for the University of Michigan to be like, he's our guy, right? Like he's our native son. He is a Michigan man. He has brought us back to prominence in terms of winning Big Ten championships, making the college football playoff, all these things that they haven't done in a very long time. He is doing that. At what cost, I think, is what some in and around the administration or the university are asking. I'm not commenting one way or another on that, but yes, the fact that he is there and will be on the sideline, I certainly think that if nothing else, it's the calming influence on JJ McCarthy. I think I want to be clear about what I'm saying here, because every head coach and quarterback likely, again, I'm not in these locker rooms, I would imagine every head coach and quarterback have a bond, a special bond that they're connected forever. Like, no matter how it ends, no matter how, if you win, lose, draw the game, they're connected forever. It seems to me, as an outsider, and I've said this kind of cautiously for the last really year and a half now, since JJ McCarthy took over for Cade McNamara back in the 2022 season, early in that year, it has felt like there is just, like, I don't know how to, an extra special connection or bond between JJ McCarthy and Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
I don't know if Jim Harbaugh like sees himself in JJ McCarthy, right? Because he's a former Michigan quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's some family connection where these two like go back. Like I really don't know. It just, when I see them interact, and again, I'm only seeing when the cameras are there, so I'm not seeing anything else, obviously. It just feels like there's some deeper connection between the two of them than I see on a lot of sidelines between a head coach and a quarterback, even though there are connections on all those teams. So to me, and you talked about, we're going to need to see something from JJ McCarthy in this game that we haven't had to see all year, because his run game's been really good, his offensive line's been really good, and his defense has been outstanding. The last time JJ McCarthy was asked to do a lot in a game, and maybe this is unfair to him, the last time really he was asked to do a lot in a game was the TCU game last year, and that was a heck of a game. TCU obviously comes out on top. It could have very easily gone the other way. A couple calls here, a couple calls there, right? I mean,
Right.
Michigan was in that game. It's not like they got bullied off the field. They were in that game, but they did lose. So how will he respond to getting his number called here? I think having Harbaugh on the sideline, for whatever it's worth, I think it's a calming influence for him. And I do think that will make a difference. And again, Michigan's going to be better when Jim Harbaugh is on the sideline than when he's not. That's why, Harry, I don't know if you know this. It's kind of, I've said it on other podcasts. Like, I'm actually an Ohio State fan. So I'm devastated. I'm devastated by what Michigan has been able to continue to do to Ohio State. I would personally love to see Jim Harbaugh no longer at Michigan. And here's why. Because he scares me. He's a really good coach. When Michigan hired Jim Harbaugh back in, was it 2015 season, going into the 2015 season, I think it was, when they were going through that process, I said, and because Ohio State has Urban Meyer, just won a national championship, all these things, right? I said, I don't really care who they hire as long as it's not Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh is the only one here that scares me. Out of all the people they were talking about, Jim Harbaugh is the only one that scares me. Well, lo and behold, they hired Jim Harbaugh, and for a long time, I mean, many years there in a row, he couldn't get over the hump. He couldn't do it. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, can Ohio State please land the knockout punch to get him out of there? Because he's going to turn it around. Like I told my friends that, I told my family that. I wasn't on social media at that time, so I wasn't like broadcasting it on Twitter or X or anything. But like I was telling anyone that would listen, like they're like, Kelley, why are you worried? You keep beating him. You haven't lost to him in forever. I said, he's going to turn it around, and I'm very nervous for when that happens. He has turned it around, and it hasn't gone back the other way. And so as an Ohio State fan, I want Jim Harbaugh to leave the University of Michigan. I want him to go to the NFL or do whatever. I just want him to be gone so that Ohio State can have a chance to win that game. As a college football fan, I love that Jim Harbaugh is at Michigan, because it's just a Michigan man should be leading Michigan. And I say that as an Ohio State fan. Michigan man should be leading Michigan. It's good for the rivalry. It's good for that program. And they are a blue blood. I might really not like them, but they're a blue blood and they deserve respect. And they are the kings of the Big Ten, and they have been now for 3 years. Ohio State fans don't like hearing that. Got to beat them. You got to beat them on the field. That's what it is. So anyway, I've probably gone on too long there. So Michigan is a great program. They are better when Jim Harbaugh is on the sideline, and I do expect him being there to have a positive effect and influence on JJ McCarthy in a game in which Michigan's going to need JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, I struggled with both of these picks, honestly, trying to deduce who I think is going to win. I do have Michigan. My projections have Michigan by 2. So, naturally I'm riding with Michigan and the projections, but it's not something I'm comfortable with. Alabama is there's nobody that has more momentum than Alabama, coming into the playoffs. So, no confidence whatsoever, but Michigan, I agree. The better defense, the better team, the better trenches, per my grading. So I'm really not confident. I know I've said that, but I'm riding Michigan. I think they are the better team. I think this is Harbaugh's year. He's only progressed as a coach, in his success. You said he wasn't able to get to that hump. Well, he hit a wall, he broke it. He hit another wall, he broke it. And so it felt like Ohio State, then the Big Ten, and then the college football playoffs. And here we are. This is his chance to break that wall again. So see what Michigan can do.